Hi, everybody. Andrew Muller here for the New American Magazine. You probably haven't heard about the Dark Enlightenment, but you need to know about it because it is coming at us like a freight train, some might say. And everyone's talking about AI. Everyone has an opinion. If you ask somebody, what do you think about AI? You're probably going to get a garden variety response of, oh, it's a tool, but it could be misused, or I like to use it to proofread my emails, but we need to make sure it doesn't get too far. But no one has really thought through, rank and file Americans that is, what is going to happen to AI if we don't check it, if we don't think about this critically. And governments all around the world, particularly in the United States, are starting to integrate AI into government. What does that mean for our future? Is it going to become an overlord over the people? Is it going to take over education, religion? These are serious questions, and unfortunately, our inquiries into those issues are not at pace with the development of this technology, which is very concerning. We have here with us today to discuss this Joe Allen. I think he is probably one of the leading AI experts in the country. He wrote a great book, which you need to check out, called Dark AI. He's also the AI editor for Steve Bannon's War Room, which you've most certainly heard of, and he joins us today. Joe, thanks for joining the program.
Andrew, thank you very much for having me.
It's a pleasure. So the Dark Enlightenment, I reached out to you to talk about that. I honestly didn't know about it until just a few months ago. And, you know, it's a little bit on the internet. You can look it up, find some mainstream articles. There's one from the New York Times that I read titled What We Must Understand About the Dark Enlightenment. But other than that, there's not tons of content out about this. Could you just define for our listeners what the Dark Enlightenment is?
Can I define it? Probably not. I can maybe sketch out an image of it, though. The Dark Enlightenment is actually, as a term, a bit out of fashion. It was popular a number of years ago, maybe even a decade ago. I can remember that being a moniker. Actually, before. It's that long ago that I don't remember the specific dates. But, you know, Nick Land, the technology philosopher, is probably the first place you would want to look to get a sense of what this Dark Enlightenment is about. His essay collection, Xenocosmography, goes back to, I believe it begins in like 2013, so roughly 12 years ago. That would be the place to look to get a really good sense of what the thought was at that time and how it's now influencing culture. Nick Land delineates three different areas that this new reaction or Dark Enlightenment or whatever you want to call it embodied. One is traditionalism, anti-modern traditionalism. So imagine your ortho bro who doesn't have a television and doesn't let his 20 kids use an iPad. The other is the so-called racial right, race realists, people who don't really tend towards religious thinking, much more towards scientific evolutionary thinking, especially as evolutionary thinking applies to human beings. The left would say that they are just racists, and Christians would say that they are just atheists. But anyway, that was an integral part of all of that. And then you had the tech accelerationists, and these are all overlapping categories, but they were all in communication with each other via various forums and blogs and even Twitter back in those days. So the Dark Enlightenment, in a nutshell, is the remainder after you have removed political correctness and social norms from the conversation. I think that's the Dark Enlightenment.
Very good. And Curtis Yarvin's another character you read about a lot in this Dark Enlightenment idea. And Yarvin has connections to Peter Thiel, who, of course, is with Palantir, connections to J.D. Vance, and the folks who are in that AI tech Silicon Valley space that are connected to the Trump administration. One thing about this that sticks out to me is I think a lot of young men are falling prey to this where, they are tired of the corruption in government. Maybe they, are into big tech, into all the latest developments. And there kind of seems to be this trap, if you will, for our constitutional republic where you have the Enlightenment, right, in 16, 1700s. And, out of that, grew a lot of things like, Montesquieu and Blackstone, and, you had things that were good that came out of that, like the American Revolutions, and bad things, the French Revolution. But now there's this Dark Enlightenment where, maybe AI would be the next good step in governing humans. What are your thoughts on that? Is that a legitimate threat that we're seeing flushing out in the 2025 American political landscape? Is it a possibility, Joe, that we might have people who are otherwise, you might think are right-wing, who actually think that computers can govern humans better than humans can?
As an immediate threat, the idea that an artificial intelligence system would be sophisticated enough to monitor and govern any individual's life, let alone an entire organization, that's a bit of a stretch. I think that we're talking about technologies that are deployed by human beings for human purposes. So the notion of algocracy, the notion that algorithms would be the superior way to govern a people, we are in some shade of that already, but the conversation should start now. I don't think people should worry about Palantir or whatever remnant of Doge is still in the government turning over the entirety of the federal government to an artificial intelligence. That's ridiculous. But what is happening is the push, and these ideas go back quite a long way, but the push to integrate AI into the federal government as an advisor, as an assistant that can summarize documents, that can create presentations, all these sorts of things, all the same sort of stuff you get in the corporate world or in academia, where people take shortcuts to actually thinking, and people take shortcuts to actually researching and understanding a topic. That's all being integrated into the federal government. Automated systems have long been integrated into the federal government. The new White House AI action plan is pushing for even deeper integration of AIs and digitization in general into the federal government, so that agencies across the board will begin to use chatbots in that way. There are a number of contracts going back to the Biden administration and then going forward into the Trump administration with all these different tech companies to do exactly that. Everyone from, as you mentioned, Palantir to even XAI with Grok. OpenAI had a contract that was already solidified under Biden that has come into effect to integrate ChatGPT, or at least GPT technology, into the federal government. It's kind of a specifically trained and fine-tuned version of GPT. This, again, to assist federal workers. Now, this is, on its face, it's sort of like saying, okay, we're going to integrate smartphones into the federal government, right? It's going to bring things up to speed. But the two big problems, one, as I hinted at, that you are just simply making people less competent, less effective, more reliant on technology, and de facto deferring to the authority of the creators of this technology. The second problem is that dream of algocracy, that dream of using algorithms to monitor, manipulate, and ultimately to govern a people. This is absolutely a step on the way there, and to the extent that that can be curtailed, the conversation needs to begin right now.
Absolutely, it does. And, just on that note, I think that we also need to, while we warn about these threats, educate particularly young people in America about why the system of government we have in the United States is so exceptional, that our constitutional republic, the separation of powers, federalism, this is really a unique system of government in the history of humanity that has been so successful, that has brought about so much ingenuity and prosperity. And we have to be very delicate and handle that and be good stewards of it, because, representative government, where people have a voice, they can elect representatives under a constitutional system while keeping liberty at the local level. This is something that is exceptional in American history, and to bring about AI into that system under the guise of making it more efficient or more expedient in protecting our rights or security could also harm the whole system and take us towards, as you said, more of a monarchy style system system where robots and AI are ending up governing us. So I want to talk about the administration's winning the race, America's AI action plan.
Idea of monarchy, which Curtis Yarvin really has pushed this notion that the executive should be the monarch. I always, when I think about this, I imagine like Elon Musk or even Donald Trump in some sort of kind of effeminate outfit with a big crown and either going down, say, Pennsylvania Avenue or maybe that main street in Austin. But, Yarvin, I think it's important to think Yarvin through and then reject whatever you want to reject. But, one of the things that's happened, it began obviously on the left a long time ago, looking at Yarvin and kind of creating this cartoon of him. He kind of lives into that cartoon on occasion, so I see how that goes. But also now on the right, you see, or just kind of conservative media, especially people who are very, very unnerved by his ideas on technology and top-down leadership. I think that the best thing to do with Curtis Yarvin is to take the time to read, for instance, when he was writing his Mencius Moldbug, his open letter to my fellow liberals, or whatever that was, laid out the idea of the cathedral and the liberal and managerial establishment in the United States as a decentralized system, a kind of complex system that does not have one single ruler behind it, but is in fact distributed across all these different institutions, from academia to the media to corporate life to the government, right? And his criticism of that cathedral, of this kind of blob of ideologues, these left liberal ideologues, it's a very valid critique. I think anyone who reads it, probably among your listeners and readers, will see why it is that Curtis Yarvin is the icon that he became. But his ideas on monarchy, or at least the idea of a kind of a central executive figure that rules or governs top down, whether in a corporation or in the government, is, I think, diametrically opposed to the populist spirit that got Trump elected. It's opposed to the independence of mind and the lust for freedom that Americans have in general. Maybe not necessarily, but to set up such a system would basically open us up to that kind of abuse. And of course, Yarvin's embrace of technology as a benchmark for progress, overall progress, it's ironic because he does see what we would normally call historical progress as a de-evolution, but he still sees the utility in technology. And I think that's why you have people like Peter Thiel who are associated with him, and also even J.D. Vance, who's also very much a techno-optimist. And that's probably why you had that infamous meeting between Yarvin and Elon Musk when Musk was trying to form, what did he call it? The American Party? Have people already forgotten about it? Is this the last mention that anyone's going to hear about Elon Musk's third party? I don't know. But Curtis Yarvin was sought out as an advisor to it, and at least according to rumors, it didn't really go all that well. Yarvin tends to talk over much, and I know that must seem like the pot calling the kettle black, but he definitely is a chatty fellow.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's get into this new AI package that was put out yesterday by the administration, yesterday at the time of recording this. It talks about setting up, what I thought was very interesting, a council on AI, and starting to advance AI in government. Actually, there's a little header in the document, it's a 28 pager, and it says accelerate AI adoption in government. And in that, it says formalize the Chief Artificial Intelligence Officer Council. And there's a whole host of ideas, recommendations to put AI not only in government, but also in the Department of Defense. And it listed out a handful of things. You had a great thread on X about this. Kind of summarize for our audience what this package is and what the administration is shooting for with regards to getting AI into government more.
Yeah, first and foremost, I just want to say that I am opposed basically to the entire spirit of this AI action plan. There are certain elements that are sound if you just believe that summoning digital demons is the way to make a better American future. But just to give it an objective breakdown, the AI action plan is 3 pillars. The first, to accelerate and innovate in AI, is what it sounds like. The second is to build out data centers and infrastructure. So that's actually data centers and the power and the water and the chip manufacturing and the chip export controls. And then the last is to lead in for America to lead in diplomacy and security as it regards artificial intelligence. And if you begin really with the central pillar, the second pillar, the building out of the infrastructure, the building of the data centers, you get a sense then of the rationale behind the first pillar, the accelerate and innovate. A lot of that deals with employing American workers to build out this infrastructure, employing American workers to write the code and design the artificial intelligence systems. The insistence on instilling American values in these AIs as we attempt to spread them across the world, at least among our allies, and to open source American trained AIs, AIs that are trained, quote unquote, on American values. All kinds of problems with it, but I'm just laying it out there. This is driven by this ravenous quest to eat up as much land and resources as possible to build out these massive data center complexes. And then there is, it goes unmentioned in the AI action plan, but there is behind all 4 of the frontier AI companies, that being Google, OpenAI, Anthropic, and xAI. You could add some others to it, perhaps, maybe in the near future. But all of these labs they have either executives or prominent people within the companies, even some of their founders, who believe that they are creating artificial general intelligence, artificial super intelligence coming after that, basically digital deities. So if you get this image of, militarized data centers springing up everywhere, some of the really potent, the massive data centers training massive models, they intend to fully militarize them, right? You're going to have the U.S. Army and Marines and whatnot guarding these from our adversaries. That brings us to that third pillar, right? The first being the innovation to make this all happen. The second being the infrastructure, the physical infrastructure. And the third being, well, what happens if it all goes wrong? And that's what the diplomacy and security is about. Security simply meaning to be able to detect either some sort of danger in an AI that would enable a human being to do something horrible, whether it be terrorism or a rogue state actor or an adversary, right? To identify the capability of assisting in the creation of a bioweapon, because if there's one thing AIs are pretty good at, it's to accelerate the development of drugs or pathogens or any sort of genetic engineering. Also, the more kind of traditional mechanistic ways of killing people, and then, of course, the drones. So, the question then is, how do you make sure that you are aware that these things are possibly going to happen, right? So that you can prevent them and then mitigate them if they do happen. So that last part, basically, it's like we're going to build a nuclear bomb and we're going to detonate them all over the place, but we're going to have cops and firemen on hand to make sure nothing gets out of control. And then the diplomacy element is just to establish international relations with our allies and maybe even our adversaries so that we all can agree on the standards of what is and isn't high risk, what is and isn't dangerous. But, all of it is downstream regulation for the most part, with some exceptions. It's kind of saying the spirit of it is accelerationist. The spirit of it is definitely more on the David Sachs, Mark Andreessen, Peter Thiel, and even Elon Musk being somewhere in the middle, but Elon Musk kind of wavelength, to try it, to do it, to experiment, to take risks, see what happens, and then establish regulation basically in the aftermath.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was one executive order that came out yesterday. There was a couple on AI. There was one titled Preventing Woke AI in the Federal Government. And in that executive order, it talked about LLMs, which are large language models. And it says in, I think it's Section 3, Clause B, it says that LLMs should be neutral and nonpartisan tools. And that kind of struck me when I read that, because I don't even think that's possible, is it?
No, I agree. No, it's not possible at the current state of the technology. It's a big problem for a number of reasons. The first just being that impossibility. AIs, the way that they're developed, obviously you train them on vast amounts of data, and that data is going to be biased one way or another. It's not going to be objective. No human being who produces that data has an objective point of view. So it's just a whole lot of subjective points of view, and depending on how you skew that, if you skew it liberal or conservative, you can skew it religious or irreligious, and so on and so forth, going down to the finest details. The AI is going to make the relationships between those, and it's going to be biased in that direction. After that, in the more advanced models, you're going to have human reinforcement learning. So the model has congealed, right? It's trained, it's learned from the data, it's been grown, and then you kind of prune it, you trim it, you fine tune it using human feedback, basically people asking it questions and saying, no, that's wrong, or yes, that's right. And the bias of those people is most likely going to show up in the way the model behaves. And then last but not least, the guardrails that you put on it that say, no, you can't say that racial slur, or no, you can't say a heretical statement. Let's say you're building a Christian AI. That's heretical. You don't say that. So all these biases are inevitable. That's a big problem. So that means the government technically wouldn't be able to contract. But I don't think that that's really the spirit of what they're talking about. They single out DEI. They single out, wokeness. And I think that's really what's going on, because wokeness in the big models is a defining feature. I hate that word wokeness, by the way. That's like so worn out. But as long as that's the term that's being used now, the new technical term, I guess I have to. But that wokeness, really, the cartoonish example of Google, their Gemini model, people were asking it, hey, show me Vikings, or show me the American Revolution, and it was, racially diverse and funny, but ridiculous. That sort of thing, the more important elements the AIs are being used for could be a real problem. So they're trying to get rid of this so-called top-down ideological bias. But if you want an AI that is imbued with American values, which they also talk about in this AI action plan, then you're going to have to bias the AI towards that. And you could argue whether that's top down or bottom up. You can argue whether free speech or free association or the ideal of a constitutional republic, if all of those are ideologies or beliefs or natural law or whatever, one way or the other, it's a political move. And it's fine. I don't want woke AI. I don't want any AI, to be honest. But if we're stuck with AIs, then a woke AI would be more irritating in many ways than a so-called based AI, to invoke another worn-out term. And so I get it, but ultimately what we're seeing, there's this misconception, I think, among people who look at transhumanism, technocracy, the entirety of the technological system. It's one that's, I think, easy to gravitate into because it's easy, it makes for an easy explanation for the complicated things we see. And that is that you have this kind of singular cabal driving towards a new world order, or a one world global government, or like this one monolithic sort of power structure that will bring all human beings to heel, an antichrist, basically. And I think that as an archetype, that is something that one should take very seriously. But what we're seeing right now is the fruits of the production of technologies with a lot of rival factions within our elite class. And everything that we heard about with the World Economic Forum and the Fourth Industrial Revolution and the kind of corporate transhumanism, those points of view were predominant, for political reasons. We wanted to have national sovereignty, and they were a very, very influential force behind everything we saw during the pandemic. So naturally they would become an enemy of anyone who has a nationalist impulse or a traditionalist impulse. But the idea that they were the driving force behind, say, transhumanism or technocracy or techno-fetishism in general, it was absurd then, and it's basically obviously absurd now. The ideal of using technology for everything possible to fix human problems, to basically correct or optimize the human condition, that goes across political boundaries. It goes across any kind of ideological leaning towards globalism or nationalism. And it honestly, the more I see evangelical Christians basically calling for some kind of bizarre Christian transhumanism, although they would never call it that, the more it's obvious that even the religious barriers are not necessarily the defining points as to whether something is or isn't transhumanist, technocratic, so on and so forth. So what we're seeing now is the ascendance of a rival faction over and above the more left liberal, globalist, socialist World Economic Forum Davos class, right? Davos man. Some overlap, obviously. A lot of the same people who were at Davos are now going against the kind of World Economic Forum model or tendency, but we're just in a different phase now. And a lot of that is a matter of rival factions, of elites jockeying for power. And right now, I don't want to use these guys as the true identifier of it, but I think that the kinds of people like Peter Thiel or Mark Andreessen, maybe even David Sachs, although this is maybe a bad example, or Elon Musk, or anyone who's kind of signaling right, these were not people who were allied necessarily with, say, the World Economic Forum. Yes, I know Musk, supposed young global leader and all that, but I think those are all tenuous connections. I think we're seeing very literal and actual struggle between different elites, and they're going to use every tool at their disposal. So everything we call transhumanism, AI, robots, brain-computer interfaces, biohacking, genetic engineering, so on and so forth, anything that smacks of power and profit, they're going to latch onto. And I think that's probably the principle. If I could leave you with any one principle at all, it's that what is driving all of this move towards algocracy, or this move towards technocracy, or transhumanism, however one wants to define it, this move towards the embrace of technology to radically alter the human condition is trans-political, it's trans-ideological, and it is based solely on that ancient principle, more territory, more chicks, more money, more power.
Absolutely. So I just want to double click into that. I know we're almost out of time here, but that's a fascinating take, because I think a lot of people, myself included, sometimes even look at all this stuff happening with AI and technocracy and transhumanism and think Great Reset, globalism, that's the play. But you're saying that there's a group of people, a fraction of them who do want that, but also there's another faction who just kind of wants, for lack of a better phrase, to live forever, eternal life, power, wealth, influence, etc., and that AI would be a catalyst to bringing that about. So that's what you're kind of alluding to here. It's not just Great Reset globalism, but it's also just human nature wanting to live forever, or like in the book of Genesis, be as gods, knowing good and evil.
Yes, I think that the sooner we can dispense with tying these ideas together as if they're somehow interlocked, globalism with transhumanism, for instance, I think the sooner people will really be able to understand what's happening. Because take the nuclear bomb. The nuclear bomb was developed first by the fairly capitalist Western nation of the United States, but also developed by the Soviets, and would have been developed surely by the fascists if they had lasted that long. So power, money, territory, those are not tied to political ideology. Those are just natural human instincts that in an ideal society would be curtailed by morals and a dedication to some transcendent principle. But down here on earth, especially in what appears more and more like a Kali Yuga, they're going to be accentuated and exaggerated. So artificial intelligence, surveillance, digital currency, having everyone basically linked up into their own digital silos, and then everything else that spills out from that. Autonomous vehicles, algocratic government, all these sorts of things. That's something that could be embraced by basically any culture, and it's being embraced, right? It's not politically neutral, and it's not neutral. I don't want to give you that impression, because life under such a system would be pretty nightmarish, whether it was fascist, communist, capitalist, or whatever you want to put on the outward framing. But yeah, I just think that one of the real problems we have in confronting this is the lingering reaction to the pandemic and these globalist organizations that were so much a part of that, and associating, I think, falsely transhumanism with them. Now, look, it's not that they aren't on that wavelength. The Fourth Industrial Revolution was clearly a transhumanist sort of corporate slogan, but it was a corporate slogan that derived from people who simply do not agree with that point of view at all. For instance, the reason we're using the term transhumanism is because of Max Moore. And Max Moore, who kind of recoined it in the 80s and 90s, it goes back to Teilhard de Chardin and Julian Huxley, but he recoined it in the 80s and 90s independently. And he is very much a libertarian. He doesn't believe the singularity is coming. He is completely against the sort of socialist, globalist ideals of the World Economic Forum, right? So clearly he has at least some say in what transhumanism is, even though once your brand gets out there, anybody can use it. But again, it's kind of comical to use transhumanism and globalism synonymously when the guy who basically is responsible for us using the term was neither globalist nor socialist nor anything like that, right? So, like I say, I just think that the sooner we get past that, the less we end up in really kind of silly situations like we did in January of this year, where, as I've remarked many times, now I'm wearing it out like woke and based, but you know the difference between evil transhumanism and good American technology? About 6 months. Because it really was cartoonish. In 2024, during the campaign season, everybody's talking about the globalists and the transhumanists and the Biden administration and the AI and the technocrats and so on and so forth. And then, not everybody, by the way, a lot of people stayed solid on this, and I really, really, really appreciate it, especially at your publication. A lot, people stayed extremely strong on this and drew hard lines. But as we all know, many did not. And suddenly the world's wealthiest transhumanist was being embraced by people who had made a career on critiquing transhumanism, because now it's just good American innovation and technology. And that's kind of the fruit is now being seen in this AI action plan. It may seem dystopic, and it kind of is, but I do think that the two things we can rely on, number one, humans are very resilient, and they're most resilient when they're confident. The more confident people are that they can overcome this, the better off we're going to be. Maybe everybody's not going to make it, but enough of us will make it. And the second thing is to not necessarily overinflate the power of the people at the top of this pyramid or the tops of these pyramids. They are extraordinarily powerful, and the technologies at their disposal, everything from AI to just general data gathering and surveillance, and the ability to organize people to come kill you. These things are definitely to be understood, respected, and combated, but they're not invincible, and their technologies are not flawless. So the more people are willing to reject this idealized version of their various transhuman worlds, and the more people reject the idea that these are overwhelmingly powerful figures that cannot be destroyed, that they inevitably will take over the whole world, we have to push that aside as much as we can, or push it to the periphery as much as we can, and just understand that as flawed as all of us are, and as crazy as this whole battle is going to be, that the only way you're going to make it is if you understand you can win and just tell yourself you will.
Absolutely. Very well said. So just final question here. I know we're going a little over time, but I appreciate you being so generous with it. What would be the solution in a nutshell to this? If you're advising the Trump administration, personally, I would just love to see a hammer taken to AI and we just get rid of it altogether, though I don't think that's going to happen at all. We're far past that. But what's the solution? Is it keeping AI in government, but doing it a certain way? Is it getting it out altogether? What would be your solution?
Solution. No plural on that. Yeah, I think hammer to AI is probably a good one if we're just going to go with solution, but that's probably not going to pass committee and will not get the votes required. The way I've tried to answer this question for the last few years is that you can't see it all in one level, right? So the first thing that you have at your disposal is your personal choice. If you don't need these technologies, and most of us don't, then say no. Did you need the vaccine? No? Okay. Say no. And that saying no on an individual level is incredibly powerful, especially once you get up to the next level, the communal level. And you have communities of people who together, in some degree of harmony, say yes to this and say no to that. And so I think cultivating that, right, individual sovereignty and then group cohesion and community and that sovereignty is going to be very, very important, because you can't control the whole of your state, the whole of your city. You probably can't control your whole neighborhood, but you can have some real effect there. And then above that, you have the institutions, schools, government agencies, corporations, all of these sorts of things. You may be able to have some real influence there. If we're just talking about AI, just point out the many flaws and downsides and do your best to maintain a human classroom or a human workplace and a human church, for the love of God. But above that, you have the political. And, a year ago, I was more optimistic about the possibility that politics could offer some real solutions, and it still could. You could say, as they tried to say, as Max Tegmark with the Future of Life Institute tried to do, pause the AI and you will not train any system above the level of GPT-4, right? So we won't shoot for artificial general intelligence and superintelligence and those gods. But that didn't work. It didn't work for 5 minutes. And certainly now, with the solidification of the Trump administration's position on all this, they're basically just going to open the floodgates to all this and let the Cthulhu swarm on in, whatever form that takes. But politics is still perhaps a means. You look at the state laws that were passed in Texas or even in California, the laws that were tried to, that you had David Sachs and other types, and Mark Andreessen, these kinds of people pushing for that 10-year moratorium on state regulation. They pushed for that to strike down laws such as have just been passed in Texas and have been in effect in California for about a year now. And all of these are reasonable laws. They're in California, transparency on where you gather your data to train your AI. You can't make malicious deepfakes. You can't make child pornography with AI. You can't use AI in a predatory manner, right? And that was really an important point in the Texas legislation. It basically just, you can't use AI for behavioral manipulation or anything that is unconstitutional. It's kind of vague, but it's an attempt, right? It's just setting some sort of standard saying you can't cross this boundary with your technology. And so it is possible to do that. And it's happened right now in California, Texas, Colorado, various places. So yeah, the political is there. But, to wrap that all up, you asked for a solution. I've given you like a bunch of half solutions, half-baked solutions, and that's the best you're going to get out of me. But, the individual sovereignty is extremely important, and also the collective spiritual direction of your culture, right? Is your culture Christian? Is your culture Hindu? Is your culture some sort of secular, mongrelized version of philosophy or religion, right? Like some kind of flag-waving religion. All of these questions will also determine a lot about the future of these technologies and just the future of the various human peoples. So that is very, very important too, but that again begins in the individual. But all that being said, would I have them ban AI if I could? Yes. What about China? Well, if we banned AI, China wouldn't be able to build it because they just copy everything we do. And what if China started building it up? Well, then you make sure that they don't. But that argument is not winning the day at the moment. So we're kind of stuck with the people who are in charge, and we have to deal with them as they are, at least for now. Not to say that one should stop putting pressure on them. Never, ever, ever stop putting pressure on them. But, at a certain point, you have to understand that maybe they're not going to take your side on these sorts of issues. Trump being a good example.
Brilliantly said. And ultimately, our goal is to protect our constitutional republic. We want to keep government limited. We want to keep our freedoms and our sovereignty individually and our states and our communities as vast as possible, as large as possible. And we can't relent on this because I feel like we're way behind on this AI discussion and it's catching up to us like a freight train. I can't say that enough. So, Joe, thank you so much for the commentary and the thoughts. Brilliant as always. How can people follow you, support your work, buy your book?
The book, it will be 2 years old in just a month and a half. The book is Dark Aeon, Transhumanism and the War Against Humanity. You can find it, signed copies, darkaeon.xyz, AEON, darkaeon.xyz, or anywhere else books are sold. And my website, which hopefully by the time this airs, I will have some new material up, joebot.xyz.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Joe. Really appreciate it, and God bless you, sir.
Hey, thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for watching this episode. Stay tuned to thenewamerican.com for more great commentary like this, and we're going to continue to cover this subject extensively. Until next time, God bless you. Thank you.
Sophia paused before the door. It read, Department of Biodigital Convergence. Just inside was a new world, a better world, the one of everlasting life, of no pain, of no loss, of no problem. She entered the chamber and her surroundings changed. She saw around her an infinite field of waving golden grain surmounted by cloudless blue sky. The AI voice whispered gently in her mind, Welcome to the singularity. She couldn't see it and couldn't feel it, but her body had almost instantly been covered by a swarm of tiny gray multi-legged bots that melted through her clothes and into her skin. Not perceiving the nightmare, her eyes had already been consumed and the rest of her body was dissolving as the bots digested her flesh. She felt only a warmth suffusing her being. Drowsy, she drifted to sleep, and her last thought was one of panic. Would she ever wake? Could a nightmare vision like this be an outcome of the much-hyped transhumanist technological singularity? Enter the world of the future as illuminated by the experience of the past in Endgame. And find out how the disastrous COVID pandemic response fits with the technocratic elite's thirst to create a transhumanist utopia. Get Endgame from shopjbs.org.